Stage 2 is just around the corner within a couple days, and so we're going to do pick'ems for week 1 of VCT Pacific and the 4 teams that are going to make champs and a dark horse that could take one of these guys' spots. And so we're going to jump straight into it for week 1. And Gen.G Zeta Division, it seems like Gen.G has pretty much overhauled their roster. They're keeping Ashe, they're keeping Texture and Charon, and then they're switching out 2 other positions, which Lakia is no longer the IGL. They're bringing in 2 rookies, and so it seems like an upgrade in firepower. And I think Gen.G are the clear favorite just because Zeta Division has been on occasion, won a game or two, but I feel like it isn't usually until later on where some of the stakes are decided. I would be happy to be wrong. I would love for a Japanese team to be able to be on the rise. I feel like DFM has been carrying that mantle, but Zeta Division seems like in a small pond of teams that aren't that competitive as of recently. And for the next game, Team Secret and Viral, I have pretty high stocks on Team Secret. They've again overhauled the roster. There's no Jesse Vash. They have Zeus, and I think by deciding to go into some of the younger talent, it shows that not only is it not necessarily an immediate fix, but it's a look towards the future, and especially when things are going to be so mixed up in the near future, I think, at least for the time being, Team Secret has a lot of potential to be able to make things competitive in a series or in a league where it's very top heavy with the Paper X, with the T1, Anangshim. And so I think they're pretty in heavy contention depending on how this first week plays out. And for Viral, it just seems like they haven't had their first win at all this whole year. And yes, they've kind of been one of the victims, the teams that once they get into tier 1, they feel like they have to change things, things aren't going to work the same. And I wonder why that's the case. Like, I think especially them, like, going into Ascension, they pretty much went undefeated, and it was pretty much like a run it down type of style that was very unique to them. They're playing a lot of the Jet, and they kind of abandoned that play style until the later end of stage 1. And going into this, I think it just has to be a situation where you have to prove it. Viral has to prove it that they're capable of winning a game in tier 1. And from then on, they have to take game by game. They can't have too high expectations, considering it's pretty much almost the end of the year and they haven't had a win. In full sense, in Nongshim, I think I'm pretty high on Nongshim considering I watched some of their EWC games. And given off of their form, I feel like they have shown really high contention for being one of the best teams in the world. Not in just specific, but I know when things happen regionally, I know that teams tend to react different. There's, a lot of teams that have been playing, been screaming against, Nongshim in Pacific. And so you can kind of pick up on the tendencies, the play style, where Nongshim tends to dominate in internationals. Everybody knows that once you're able to play in the server against Zombie, that it's a completely different story than trying to prep for it and trying to scrim for it. It's pretty much like, once you're in the server, it's not anything that could be practiced. And for full sense, they pick up Frost, and I think that may lead to some early like friction, not in the necessarily of like disagreements, but I think friction in terms of Frost had a different roster, and so he kind of had to depict a playstyle and odd comps and anti-strats towards other teams. And so for him to jump into a new roster where there's a lot more talent, there's a lot more firepower, but it's a lot of familiar territory, it's gonna be harder to depict when to go off of Cruz's read versus Frost's game plan. And so I think those two may clash, not in the sense of like a fight or something, but I think they at once were synced, but now they have to kind of go through the kinks of kind of getting back together, if that makes sense. So for Nongshim, I think I'm pretty heavy on them. They do play a 2-1 along with DRX, so as we get to that, it's going to be pretty interesting. For DRX, I think they were a victim of not good group in the last stage, and so that led them to a really high placement going into playoffs. but unfortunately they kind of bombed out during playoffs, and that kind of left a sour taste in everybody's mouth, as DRX has been the roster, or the core of DRX has been a really good potential roster. Obviously, people want Mako to be able to finally be able to lift a trophy, and I think with the constant roster shuffles, I want to kind of do my own video on DRX, because there's a whole different thing about the head coach, and they're constantly doing roster shuffles, whether it be the coach himself or whether it be the players leaving on their own accord. And so for a DRX, there just doesn't seem to be a stability. It's funny enough, I think about it, they're kind of like the C9 of APAC, where they're constantly doing roster shuffles. I think the only difference with DRX is that they have a lot of internationals appearance, and C9 do not do the same. And so the quality is there. It's just about the execution. Do they have the execution versus the DFM that, oddly enough, when I think of DFM, I always think of their Pearl. And now that Pearl's not in the pool, what's going to be their go-to map? Because for the longest time, they just would always pick Pearl. Whenever it was the map pool and they had their choice of a map, they would always pick Pearl. And they started to get punished on it just because I felt like they had the read, or they always, felt really confident on Pearl. But then as it got towards the later stages of stage one, teams started punishing DFM just because, they would always know that they're going to Pearl. And so they can anti-strat it, they can know the tendencies. There's a lot of footage of them on Pearl. And so as much as you think the Pearl is like, really good for the team, at one point it becomes a detriment. And so now that Pearl's not out of the book and there's a new map with Summit, it seems like this is in favor of a DRX. And this, I feel like DFM are kind of on the back foot, as sad as it is to say. For RQ and Global, I think Global showed some promise with Frost, but as they go on, it will only show how this team operates and how, whether it is truly player led or if there has a different sort of play style and impact from the coaching staff, just because we know Frost left, Platoon is down the coach, and everybody is kind of down on GE. And I think it's fair to say so, just because we all know the track record of GE, where the org as itself hasn't, was never in an international until they finally picked up a coach that has the resume of bringing teams into an international. Then the coaches leave, and then that just leaves the players as, the kind of like the guide or the faces of the team. Just because Frost was a vet and a lot of the players are new within, obviously Javi, their IGO, is a rookie, and even Padman is only in his second year. Autumn came from CN, and a majority of the team just isn't that experienced. And so in this game, I feel like it's a good testing ground against RQ. They have a solid core. They really have really good anti-strats. So they just haven't got in the pressure moments and be able to win. Just like kind of like an MIBR. Like if I were to compare the two, MIBR, they're constantly on the brink in VCT, being able to cross the threshold and make it into an international. Once they get to there, they often kind of fall apart. And that was the case last year with MIBR, where they would get to international with Verno and Cortesia and even Artisan, like even that core, that they would always get to, a Masters or a Champs. They would get to a Champs, and from there they just kind of fell apart. And that seems like a familiar thing with MIBR, and the familiar thing with RQ. They've gone to internationals and haven't performed that well. And even similar to XLG, I feel like XLG has actually been the team that has broke through and made it into playoffs, where RQ has kind of stagnated. But RQ has picked up a new roster, and so it's gonna be, or sorry, not a new roster. They have the same players. They just replaced Monyet. And in this case, I think my head says RQ just because of their repertoire and their core, but I think I'm actually gonna go with Global. I think this is might be a 60-40 where RQ is more favored, but I think Global may be able to pull it out for the first week. Yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting. And along with this game, Paper X and T1, this would be a banger matchup. But considering Paper X have already clinched their chance points, it's going to be a little bit telling about how Paper X decide to take the stage. Because if they take the stage and they're a little bit like, they have a little bit like troll comps, or they have like, random comps that aren't necessarily their traditional comps, then that can get off the note that they're, taking it a little bit easy this stage. But if they're picking up on the playstyle, then I think this is kind of a trap game where Paper X, yes, they beat in T1 before, but I feel like T1's player quality has always been good, similar to a DRX, or not a DRX, a Genji. A Genji, when they're in their prime form, whenever they face a Paper X, especially with Munchkin as the IGL, they just felt like they had the read. Munchkin is the IGL for T1. He's always had the read on Paper X. And so this is a trap game in itself. If Paper X take the stage seriously, they could still lose to T1. And funny enough, on the flip side, there could be a scenario where Paper X just play really loose, troll a little bit, and end up still winning. But I think in this scenario, I think Munchkin has always had the read on Paper X, and Paper X don't have that much pressure to perform on the stage. So I'll go 2-1. And then for this game, I think for Genji, we obviously have seen kind of their ceiling when they're obviously, for Genji, last stage they were able to beat Paper X in the sense of where they had Lackey as the IGL, even Charon on the Phoenix. Like, Genji has promise, but I think it's just more of a prove it. In a scenario where Genji are also playing their second game and Nongshan are playing their second game, I feel like Genji does have the advantage of seeing the tape of Nongshan in full sense. So Genji has that advantage, but I feel like Nongshan's player quality, and considering they could be top 10 teams in the world, even though they didn't make it to this previous Masters, I think I'm going to go with Nongshan. But I wouldn't be surprised if Genji win this and take the momentum off of their win against Zeta. This one, I would, for DRX and Team Secret, I think Team Secret could be that team that knocks off a lot of their group. Their threats are T1, Paper X. Just because I feel like even on an off day, Paper X can beat Team Secret. But within this game, it's very possible for them to get to 3 wins. And in this game, it's highly likely they need 3 wins, and so they're gonna take their momentum off of a barrel win and beat DRX. So let me fill this in real quick. Is Genji, Team Secret, Nongshan, DRX, Global, T1, and Nongshan. All right, perfect. And so now we're gonna go off. Obviously, we're gonna put in Paper X as the 4th because they already have qualified. So that leaves our dark horse. I believe our dark horse that isn't automatically, qualified in this top 3. Maybe it's not through champs points, but I believe it's very likely that right now I'm stuck between a DRX and Genji. Considering DRX have made champs before, I think I'm gonna put them as my dark horse. I would put Genji very close to there, but considering that they only have 1 point, I would go with DRX. Not saying that they would win on chance points, but at least I feel like I feel very confident in that they can win, basically make top 2 in this scenario. Just because I think it depends on how the first week, obviously, if they end up losing to Team Secret, then that can bring a lot of the doubt. But, if I'm wrong, and I'm not afraid to be wrong, I'd be happy to prove it wrong. But I think DRX have the championship, caliber players. It's just about roster moves, all the external stuff. But their gameplay has always been good. Even Hyunmin, if he returns to his champs form, then, it's a no-brainer. So for the meantime, I think I'm going to put Nongshan as my 3rd. They're 2nd right now in terms of chance points, if we look real quick. And with their form, they pretty much need at least to match T1's wins in the group stage, or basically overall, just because each game is worth 1 point. But for sure, if Nongshan at least make it 3rd in the playoff bracket, if we look real quick, they at least make 3rd in the lower final, then they clinch for sure. Obviously, there's other implications that happen. But if we look back on it, I think Nongshim are for sure one of the top 10 teams. They just took a little dip in their performance, which is pretty normal for teams that end up winning a championship. It's very hard to go back to back. It's very hard to go to constant internationals, and PaperX it's always been the exception. And so for second, I think I'm gonna go with Full Sense, just because we finally have the scenario where Frost has always been talking about, and even Cruz has been talking about, where they're formerly on Talon, and they were, you know, the whole idea is that they would stick together and they would finally, make it international together as a team. But then Talon got disbanded, and so then that led for Cruz and Frost to part ways and go on their own teams. So now that it's them together, they finally go back and to champs with Primy, because last time they brought on Primy just to be able to qualify for champs. This time, stage 2, end of the year, they make a run for Shanghai, and I feel like they go to the grand final just because I believe that they don't have enough champs points. Yeah, they would have to rely on T1 and Nongshim to have poor performances for them to win on champs points. And in this scenario, I think Full Sense have that capability. They have more of the experience, maybe a little bit less time, which can be a detriment to them. But I feel like they have that it factor to finally make it across and I'll actually get some wins, maybe even make it into playoffs, which has been Frost's, ultimate wall to break, at least for champs. So then that leads to the last team, and that is T1. I feel like Team 1, again, are a highly capable team. They no longer have T1 no longer has stacks, which is pretty interesting. I wonder how this team will develop. Obviously, they have Meteor, they have Buzz, they have Munchkin, and even Izu, and they brought on a new player. And in this scenario, I think that it's highly likely that they take in a new player. A lot of teams take in new players, and they kind of hit the ground running. I remember when Flashback was implemented to their champs roster, and they just hit the ground running, flying, because they had a really good read on the meta. It's so hard to say when Flashback was in and out, but I remember that run specifically was so crazy because they finally broke their curse for DRX. And in this case, T1 go back to their form where they have always been capable. They just, at least recently, when it came to Masters London, they hit the PRX wall, and PaperX was clearly the better team. In Pacific, they look like a top 1 team, PaperX. And in this case, T1 don't have to run into a PaperX, and so I think this is their stage for them to win. If anything else than a grand finals, then I think it's actually a loss for them. This is their stage for them to dominate. And I think DRX and T1 are, obviously highly capable teams of being the number 1 seed and winning the grand finals for Pacific. But I feel like T1, this whole roster was made for it, whereas DRX are clearly the underdog and fighting a losing battle and have to win pretty much almost every game to make it in. This has been the pick'ems for VCT Pacific. We're also going to do Americas and EMEA pretty soon. I think the next video will be EMEA. We're going to go over them. Yeah, this has been the video. Let me know in the comments down below what you think, and I'll see you.